The information presented in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for clinical mental health treatment. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please dial 988 or head to your nearest emergency room.
Welcome to the Black People Die by Suicide 2 podcast, where we discuss all things mental health with an emphasis on suicide in the Black community. I'm your co host, Jordan.
And I am your second host, Kia.
Thank you guys for tuning in. So, on the last episode, we really got into, a little bit deeper about why we wanted to start this podcast and why we feel like it's important to talk about suicide in the Black community. For this episode, we're going to get into some of the warning signs that may indicate that, someone is experiencing suicidal thoughts or maybe considering suicide. But before we get into that, we're going to check in. How you doing, T-Kea?
Wellness check. Yes, yes, yes. How am I doing?
Yes.
I'm doing well. I cannot complain. But even if I wanted to complain, it's okay to complain.
It's okay.
People say, "Oh, I'm blessed," or "I'm
Too blessed to be stressed.
right." So it's okay. But I'm doing well. I am honestly in a space of gratitude, and I'm also looking forward to the future and things that are in the process of coming to fruition as it pertains to my career, as it pertains to uh, just even things outside of my career, whether it's traveling or relationships. Like I'm just excited about my future. Is how I feel.
Nice. You know what? I'm feeling very fulfilled, very whole today.
I love that.
Yes, we're gonna claim it. Okay. I feel very whole today. I don't know. I guess my heart is just full with like gratitude that I get an opportunity to share my experiences with people. And, I'm excited about the possibility that this, podcast can really help someone else. Um, and the idea of it opening up conversations about mental health and especially suicide for Black people because, man, our lives matter too, as we well know. So I'm doing pretty good. Feeling full, feeling whole.
Oh my gosh, I have to piggyback off that
Yeah.
because I had the opportunity, and Jordan knows where I worked at where I was working with the detention at the detention center,
Yes.
and I was there just going in there once a week, and I led a mental health and wellness and a mentoring program, and I've never done anything like that before. Like I've of course have done mentoring programs. Like I've in college I started a mentoring program. Like I've always done things for specifically for girls. And the detention center I'm working with women,
Mm.
and I never had the thought or even I knew I guess it wasn't really something I thought about in terms of wanting to work with that particular demographic. And I'm like, wow, like I enjoyed it. Like I feel like so fulfilled that I got a chance to like go into a detention center and like maybe something that I've said like impacted them, that changed
Right.
the direction of their life, and just also learning a lot from them as well. It's just not me sharing, but it's
Right.
also them sharing because I get a lot of experiences. um I've learned a lot as well from hearing from them, and that experience has made me feel very fulfilled and very excited because I would have never thought in a million years that I was a little girl who used to go see their dad in jail.
Come
And I
full
used to
circle.
see my dad through a plexiglass. And I remember having to like put my hand up on the glass. And that's very traumatizing for a kid,
Yeah.
wondering like why daddy isn't coming home.
Right.
For the longest, my mom straight up lied and said he was away at work or college, one of the two. No, it was work. And I was like, but you come home from work. So what kind of work is,
Right.
where's daddy that he's not coming home?
Right.
And eventually I just asked her, I was like, Ma, is daddy in jail? Because you gonna tell me he in college, but I can't touch him. So the math wasn't mathing at the time. So to be able to have that experience, and I was traumatized by going into jails and detention centers because of the idea of being like locked, the doors closing, the keys, like all of that was a lot for me. And I would have never thought in a million years that I would like a place that I didn't even like to drive past. I never thought in a million years that I would like go back to um go back into a detention center or a
Right.
jail and
Right.
like do that. So this experience has it has made me feel grateful and has also made me feel whole
Yes.
and feel like I'm making a difference.
Yes, it feels so good to give back. So I'm really glad you had that experience, and I'm sure the women really appreciated you coming in because they can tell, they feel the love when somebody comes in and they really care about, their lives and helping, them to succeed. So,
Yes.
so
Let's
today,
jump into the topic, girl.
again, we're going to talk about some of the signs that you may notice if somebody is potentially, having suicidal thoughts or considering suicide. This list probably isn't exhaustive, as I spoke about in the last episode. Oftentimes, we're really good at hiding what's really going on with us, but these clues can definitely get you in the right direction in terms of, someone might be experiencing a mental health crisis, especially if it's, severe enough to possibly lead to suicide. So, some of these signs are more emergent than others. They're more, was emergent the right word? That's not the right word.
Urgent.
Yes, thank you. Some of these signs are more urgent than others. And maybe indicative of someone who is uh, very close to a decision to die by suicide. So it's just important to kind of pay attention to the signs and see if you recognize this in anyone that you know or even yourself. So, one of the first things is talking about wanting to die or talking about killing yourself or someone else talking about killing themselves. Um, this could be things like, man, I really wish I wasn't here, or my life would be so much better if I was gone, etc. So, if someone's talking about or alluding to the fact that, or even saying, I really want to kill myself, that's blatant and, am I making sense?
No, it is. Like if someone's saying, if they're telling you, if they're, because there are people who will tell you,
Yes.
they'll
Yes.
say, I want to kill myself, I want to die, I don't want to be here anymore. Or even if it's an indirect of, I wish I wasn't here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like a lot of times people will just straight out tell you as well. But other things to look out for as well, if you, and that's not also, let me just go back a little bit, not just what they're saying, but what they're posting. Because what people post on social media, they can post indirect, I guess, cries out for help. And that is also something to pay attention to. So, like, if they're quoting certain lyrics, or if they could straight up say, I want to kill myself, or just trying to, really read through the lines that it's not just also what the person may say verbally, but what are they posting? Right. And it can even be sometimes people do screenshots of quotes, but like if you look and you see all the quotes that they've been posting have been like really morbid, it's like, okay, something might be there.
Right. Yeah, something definitely may be going on. So another possible sign of suicide that can also be pretty urgent is if someone is looking for the means to actually die by suicide. So, for instance, maybe they're looking into buying a firearm and that's unusual for them. Maybe you notice that they're stockpiling medications and that's unusual for them. They typically will take their medication as prescribed, and this is a different behavior for them. Or they could actually, conduct an internet search, say, what are different ways that one can take their own life. That may be a pretty good sign that someone is seriously considering suicide.
Yeah, or like saying goodbye, or like,
man, yeah,
or like writing text messages that kind of imply that, or like putting certain affairs in place. Those are things to really just, to kind of look out for. And like giving things away that are like a prized possession. Right. It's just like, that would be like me giving away my urn necklace that has my sister's ashes, because I tend to either have it on or carry it in my bag.
Right.
And if it's like, okay, wait, what's going on here? So really thinking about what are some of the things that people hold near and dear to them that they would be giving, that might be a sign that they are considering suicide as well.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned about them saying goodbye, we always say goodbye to people, but it's almost like an air of finality, or like you're not going to talk to them again. So say for instance you may hear something like, "Man, I'm really going to miss talking to you." And you're like, well, "Where are you going? Like we're not going to talk anymore?" Or um I'm really I hate that I'm not going to be able to see you anymore. Like things like this, and that person doesn't have a logical explanation for it. Like maybe they're moving across the country, but I guess even still we have like FaceTime and stuff now where you could still see someone. But like saying goodbye, but it seems very final.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not going to talk to them again. That's something you should really pay attention to.
Yeah. And like I thought about for me, what was a sign was I started writing a suicide letter
Mm.
to my siblings and my mom, and I don't did not finish it. I don't think I finished writing it, but I know I started it.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that I remember telling a friend, and I actually had a friend who I was telling that I was writing the letter, and she didn't like try to stop me or say like, "Oh, you shouldn't do it." And she didn't encourage me either, but she just kind of gave me the space, and she's like, not in the sense of like, well, if that's what you want to do it, but more so like just it was empathy behind it. It wasn't of I'm trying to stop you, but
Right.
I'm not encouraging you either. It's just
Right.
that goes to holding space
Mm-hmm.
for a person to just let them simply be and experience their emotions as they are going through them or trying to process them.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely, because I know, like with, I believe I'm gonna say allegedly, like they said that Twitch left a suicide letter.
Mm-hmm. I heard that too. Yeah, I think allegedly his wife had found, or someone, from my understanding, but I did hear that he allegedly left something. Oh, yes. Okay. So another sign is talking about feeling hopeless, or experiencing like feelings that you're in unbearable pain that just doesn't ease up. Um,
Yeah, because I was gonna add to that, like I wanted the pain to stop.
right.
Like it wasn't that I wanted to die. I just didn't want to. The emotional and mental anguish was so unbearable to the point that I just felt like it would be better if I wasn't here because I wouldn't have to have that pain, like getting
Right.
up every day to the point where like I would just sleep all the time because if I was sleeping, I wasn't thinking,
Right.
and sleeping was keeping me alive. So some people even sleeping too much
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Yeah, I definitely experienced that myself, with feelings of just hopelessness, like it was never going to get better. And that definitely played a huge role in my depression and having suicidal thoughts, just feeling like there was nothing good coming down the pike for me, and definitely led to me, experiencing some of my darkest days.
Yeah, and another thing is feeling like you're a burden to other people.
Mm,
You're
yes.
like, oh, I don't want to say anything because then I'm going to put too much on them. That person already has a lot going on, and it's like when and it can be true, but at the same time, like it's better to tell somebody than to not tell
Right.
somebody.
Right.
Because even I'm gonna say most people or many people who love you, if that was something that you was to say with them, even if they had something going on, they would I'm gonna say most people or many people would just stop and be like, okay, this is something serious I need to attend,
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't see it as a burden.
Right. Yeah, I think it's easy for us when we have depression or any other mental health disorder. It's easy for us to feel like have that negative self-talk, and it kind of reinforces itself that, oh my gosh, if my family didn't have to worry about me anymore, like life would be so much easier for them, or I'm just taking up space, and like my life doesn't really matter, and things would just be better if I was gone. It's very easy to get those negative messages kind of reinforced just with, depression. And I know I definitely felt like a burden to my family. I wasn't working. I really wasn't, contributing much to the household, and I just felt like, damn, you know, my mom would be a lot better off if I wasn't here, like sucking up her air. That's really how I felt, and yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that point up because that's I kind of felt like just like life being too much when you talk about. I remember I would tell my friend like, okay, I'm stressed out because I'm in graduate school, all of the stress that comes with being in a graduate program. I'm working a full-time job and I'm still not making enough money to pay my bills, and still like dealing with childhood trauma, dad being on drugs, watching my mom be abused by her partner, um, just all of those things that were never addressed. And it's like you have your past and your present that are like coming together,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel so overwhelmed, or I felt so overwhelmed. And so, and another thing too, when you just don't feel when you sometimes feel overwhelmed, another sign or something that a person can experience is like their agitation or irritable like goes up drastically as well. And that is also a sign too, or could be a sign. Just because somebody's agitated, that does
Right.
not mean they're
Right.
suicidal. We're not saying that. But we're saying if you're paying attention to patterns and you're seeing that things are out of the ordinary, and this person has constantly been agitated or irritable, and you're seeing other signs, there could be a possibility that that person is suicidal.
Right. Yeah, I definitely experienced a lot of irritability as well. I think another sign to look for is any increased alcohol or substance use. Um, Again, you know, for a lot of people that are in recovery, they may have a co occurring disorder, which is someone who is diagnosed with a mental health disorder and someone who is diagnosed with a substance use disorder. So maybe for someone who does have a diagnosis of substance use disorder, they've increased the amount that they're actually consuming. Or someone who doesn't typically use substances will begin to, use alcohol or use any type of drug, and that's unusual behavior for them. But it's definitely something to pay attention to.
Yes. And I mean, I did talk about sleeping too much, but also sleeping too little.
Mm.
For some people, because some people can't sleep like at all. And for me, it was just I was sleeping like 10 plus 10, 15 hours a day. Like I would just get up and use the bathroom. I would not no eating, just sleeping all the time. So again, it's not one side, and what one person have as signs doesn't mean that the other person who may be suicidal will have the same signs.
Right.
So it's just important that if you know a person and you know their typical behavior, whatever is outside the norm for that person's behavior.
Right.
And so, like, I could be sleeping too much, another person could be sleeping too little.
Right. Yep. A lot of these signs are definitely individualized, and you'll kind of pick up on them, you know, especially if you know that person or you're very close with that person and they're behaving in ways that they wouldn't typically behave. Um,
Isolation.
oh,
So, yeah, let's talk about
yes.
isolation, because
Oh.
I have the tendency to do that as well. But when I was suicidal, I most certainly isolated because one, I'm from New Jersey, but I live in the DMV area. And so, like, it's easy for me to isolate because I don't live in the state that I was born and raised in.
Right.
And so, my family members, the most time, the only way they can really get me is they have to drive 3 hours to get to me,
Right.
or they have to constantly call, text, FaceTime, and try to get to me. And so, a lot of times I will isolate and not respond to phone, or in that time, I would not respond to phone calls and text messages and just really not want to be bothered at all. And now I have moments where you talk about where I experience suicidal ideation, like even earlier this year when I experienced it. I didn't have a plan, but I was still just kind of having those thoughts of like, what if I died type of thing. And I started isolating, and that was like when I reached out to Jordan. Jordan is probably one of the few people that I don't isolate from. Like she's probably one of the. It's a very small. Like I actually will respond to Jordan faster than I respond to my mom. So, that is something to look out for. It definitely is isolation, but isolation goes hand in hand with depression,
Right.
because when people
Yep.
are experiencing depression, they isolate.
Right.
So, that's definitely something you want to look out for as well.
Yeah, so I was the queen of isolation. I think naturally I'm an introvert anyway. And it definitely became, oh, I don't want to be around people, or I need to recharge my battery alone, to like, I don't want to be bothered with anybody. And I know for me personally, with isolation, that just gave me more time to really ruminate and think about my depression, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And I guess I didn't really have anybody to talk to actually, bounce my feelings or my ideas off of, and it just kind of just festered. And again, which is why we talked about in the first episode the importance of kind of, you know uh, building a support network for yourself,
Yeah.
because oftentimes, those are the people that you can really go to and really feel safe about, expressing how you feel, telling them if you're, having a tough time. They can give you feedback, etc. And that's when that's really, really helpful. It's always good to have a village, because it's very hard to, experience mental health problems by yourself.
Yeah, and I have to bring this up because I want to make sure that we share this difference. I believe we talked about it in an episode or two ago, but where we talked about passive versus active
Yes.
suicidal
Mhm.
thoughts. So I'll give you the chance to explain that.
Yes. So with suicide can either be passive thoughts or active thoughts. So with passive thoughts, these are more like fleeting thoughts. So, you know, if I stepped, if my car, I'm driving down the highway, and if I managed to lose control of my car and crash into a tree, it really wouldn't bother me so much that I'd be gone. Um, Passive suicidal thoughts are just like, wow, life would be so much better if I wasn't here. Um, Thoughts like that. With active suicidal thoughts, these are thoughts where there's plan and there's mean and there's intent. So, for instance, um, I'm going to buy a gun, and tomorrow at 5 o'clock, I'm going to shoot myself. And it doesn't have to be that specific, but it's the fact that,
You have a plan and you're
yes,
planning to carry out the plan.
right.
That
That's when it becomes like, woo, it's urgent, that you get that person to treatment, because it can be fatal.
and I'm glad you said that. And I had to bring that up because I feel like they both are alarming,
Mhm.
but how you respond to one is not necessarily how you respond to the other. So
Yes.
like when I was having suicidal thoughts earlier this year, it was passive.
Right.
And so anytime if I'm experiencing those thoughts, I'll text Jordan and Jordan will ask me, is it passive or is it active? Or I'll just straight up tell her like, oh, these are passive.
Mhm.
And that way we both know like what to do in those moments. So I feel like it's very important that people are knowledgeable on the language, so that way both of them you should be concerned. Of
Right.
course, we're not
Yes.
saying one is less important
Right.
than the other, but we think in terms of how we respond to one should be
Mhm.
different, and it's important that we have that knowledge.
Yes, because oftentimes that's kind of the differentiating factor between whether someone is committed into the hospital, meaning that they're, going to go placed into a volunteer, I'm sorry, placed into inpatient care,
Mm-hmm.
especially on a voluntary or an involuntary basis, versus someone who would be safe to go home and they would be safe to do partial hospitalization where they can come during the day and leave at night. So it's very important to differentiate between someone having active suicidal thoughts or passive thoughts, because the treatment, you probably need a higher level of care if you're experiencing active suicidal thoughts, basically.
Not probably, you will.
Yeah, yeah, you will. They'll,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
you will. Like, and because even like when I text you, and I was like, well, I don't know, because I'm not trying to go inpatient. You're like, Well, since you don't have a plan, they're probably just gonna, you know, I just went and got my evo, and then I got my start date for the partial hospitalization
Right.
program, where I went in the morning at 8, and I was home by 4 o'clock, and I was in the hospital every day, Monday through Friday, and I got to go home at night. But it was good because while I was in the hospital, you know, they do an assessment in the morning, and they do an assessment in before you go in the evening, and you're constantly, you know, being watched, and they'll
Right.
engage with you, so that way should at a point where I become unsafe, I can easily just discharge from partial and go into inpatient. So in that instance, that was, you know, how we handled it. But me and Jordan, we have the knowledge and we know what to do where other people don't. So I just wanted to make sure that we talked about that.
Yeah, and like on the flip side, as we talked about on the first episode with our story, with me, I went to my therapist at my school and I told them that, you know, the night prior, I was holding a knife to my wrist and they're like, "Whoa, um, do you feel like you're going to be safe if you go home?" And I remember telling them, I don't know if I can commit to keeping myself safe. At that point, you know, I needed a higher level of care. I needed to be committed to the hospital in order to keep myself safe. You know, so that's just the kind of the difference in, you know, what T-Kea experienced earlier this year and what I experienced back in 2012. So definitely important to differentiate between whether somebody's having active or passive thoughts.
Yes, and definitely talking about rage. If a
Oh,
person is
yeah.
constantly being rageful or uh, like reckless behavior,
Mm-hmm.
those are things to look out for as well.
Yeah, so doing things they wouldn't normally do that would be risky. So maybe they're spending all their money or they're having like lots of sexual partners and that's unusual for them or they're engaging in, you know, increased alcohol or drug use, things they wouldn't normally do. This is definitely something you want to pay attention to um because you know, when you're suicidal, you probably aren't thinking about the consequences because there's an expectation that you won't be here to deal with the consequences, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yep. And of course, just having trouble functioning,
Mm-hmm.
school, work, those things, because your mind is so, a lot of times our mind can be so fixated on suicide that we can't even focus on everyday activities because we're planning on not being here.
Right.
If we plan to um, plan on actually carrying out the plan, or it's just you're in so much anguish that you can't focus.
Right.
And I don't know if we said when we talked about, I know we talked about it on the other episode, but really just speaking to suicide in terms of not saying the word committed.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we want to make sure that we are not placing blame on that individual, because we don't place blame on people who have diabetes or cancer. You don't say like, "Oh, that person with cancer was committed to their death or is committed to their death," and that kind of contributes to the stigma because it means that we feel like people have more control over their physical health
Mm-hmm.
than they do their mental health. We feel like it's easy, or we have more empathy in terms of for physical health. So it's not that I was committed to death, or my death, or Jordan was committed to her death, or any other person. It's the mental health condition that influenced the behavior. So when you are in a depression, or experiencing something that is altering your way of thinking, that is not of your own. Like that is the depression. Like kind of we talked about sometimes in the hospital, like depression brain. We'll be like, oh, that's just the depression talking.
Yep.
Um, and so it's important that we say died by suicide because we don't want to criminalize the person. A lot of times when people who experience mental health challenges, they're, you know, placed in handcuffs, or and then that makes people not want to open up because then they feel like they're doing something wrong, like they're
Mm-hmm.
committing a crime when it's not them, it's not us, it's the mental health condition. And it also kind of makes us feel like we are the perpetrator and we're not the victim. We're
Right.
the victim. And so it's important that we keep that in mind and don't say that this person committed suicide or this person tried to commit suicide. It's no, this person attempted suicide or this person died by suicide, because I'm 100% sure we're not saying any person with cancer is out here committed to their death. So the same level of empathy that you give to people who have physical health conditions is the same empathy that you need to give to people with mental health conditions.
Agreed.
Did I get that?
You got it.
So let's
Did I say?
let's
I don't think I said commit. Did I?
no, you didn't. I
Oh,
just
okay.
wanted to
Okay.
make sure that
All right.
everybody listening, oops.
Gotcha.
I just want to make sure that everybody listening and watching that they understand the importance of
The language, right?
that
Gotcha.
we use, because language can be detrimental, and it also contributes to the stigma. So now we'll just talk about like how do you help? What to do?
Yeah. So one of the most powerful things you can do for someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts and they come to you and let you know is listen. Sometimes we just want to be heard. We want someone to understand our pain, listen to our story, and really know what's going on with us. So I feel like listening is probably your best tool.
Non-judgmentally.
Non-judgmentally now. Hold on, that is very important.
Listening non-judgmentally. Let's talk about what that's why y'all should take mental health first aid. I'm just saying,
Yes,
because
you
that's
should.
we have a whole segment on listening non-judgmentally.
So, for example, somebody comes up to you and they tell you, like, someone that you know, man, I've been thinking about, they're probably going to say committing, but I'm thinking about committing suicide. I'm having a really tough time. And you're like, what? Why would you do that? That's stupid. You got X, Y, and Z, and your house is nice, and your car is nice, and you got that nice man and those kids. It's not helpful. One of the best things you can do is just let them talk. They
Yes.
probably just need to get something off their chest.
Yes. Yes, I'm so glad you said that, because a lot of times if we've never experienced that, we'll say like, well, why would you want to do that? Or like,
Yeah.
and the thing is, you have to remind yourself that you're not that person. So how you respond and how they respond are completely different.
Yes.
So stop. And you're also making it about yourself. If you say, I would do this, or why would you do this? Like, instead of actually giving that person the opportunity to just simply share, like holding a safe space, meaning you're not going to project onto what you would do or what you think they should do.
Right.
So just really holding the space. A lot of times we just want somebody to talk to. So that's why I love going to Jordan, because Jordan will just listen. Like, I ask Jordan for advice sometimes too, and then there are other times where I'm just like, no, I just need to get it out. I need to share these thoughts, and then once I get the thoughts out, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not going to carry anything out, or I don't have any ideas. And then it's like, oh, okay, because I know that I can be honest with her. I can tell her if I'm planning on carrying out a plan. So it's important that because I don't feel judged when she's listening to me, I'm always inclined to go to her. That's why she is my go to. So that's why I feel like that was something that I learned when I first took mental health first aid.
Mm-hmm.
And is why I became certified to teach it, because I'm like, people need to know, like, even when we're sitting in class and I'm on Zoom and we're going through an exercise of what listening judgmentally uh is like versus listening non-judgmentally, and we kind of read these responses and people have to sit here and think like, is that really helpful?
Right.
And then someone will say, well, I would think it would be helpful to me. And then I go back and then I, say something to educate them. And they're like, oh, I never looked at it that way. So it is very hard to listen without interjecting,
Right.
What you would do. But there's power in just listening.
Mm-hmm.
And also asking that person, like, if they say I need to talk to you, ask them, do you want advice, or do you just want me to listen? I feel like we all have to get in the habit of doing that.
Right.
Myself included, because sometimes you naturally just kind of want to fix the problem,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes people, they don't want to feel like they're being fixed or like a charity case. They just
Right.
want a space to share. So listening non-judgmentally, definitely. And I don't know if there's something you want to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's important to kind of actively listen, because sometimes you're listening and you're not really paying attention. But if you actively listen, this is a skill that's like when the person is explaining to you what's going on with them, you're kind of repeating back what it is that you're hearing. So if someone says to you, like, man, I've really been thinking about suicide, it's not like, so you thinking about killing yourself, huh? Like that that's not helpful.
Right, it's not
Like
helpful.
you could say something like, so what I'm hearing you say is that you're going through a really tough time and that's making you consider suicide. Is that correct? And the person will say, yeah, because they're going to feel hurt because you're repeating back what you've, heard them saying. It's also to get kind of clarity and understanding for yourself to make sure that you all are on the same page. And that really makes people feel heard. So
You could tell we work in the mental health field.
right.
So we're not just people with lived experience, but we also work in the field. So we are very knowledgeable as well and trained to knowing to how to respond. And then just straight up asking them, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Don't say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because hurting could be cutting, it could be burning, could be pinching, it could be pulling of the hair. That's hurting yourself, which is non-suicidal self-injury,
Right.
but that's another episode. And so it's important that you are direct. And a lot of people do have, they feel like if they say something, they're going to put the idea in their head.
Right.
You're not going to put the idea in someone's head. If they are already thinking about it, it's already there. And by you bringing it up and saying, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about dying? Are you planning to kill yourself? When you are that direct, that just gives them the space. It could just be like, oh, thank
Somebody
God
said it.
somebody asked. Now
Right.
my shoulders can drop. Now I can be vulnerable. Now I can share with you. And so we understand that it is very difficult to ask that question. But again, by listening to this podcast or by taking different mental health trainings or going to support groups or being involved in that person's treatment, that can make a big difference. And you will start to become more comfortable with having those conversations, because our goal of the podcast is to just normalize suicide in the Black community and talking about that it's a thing. Like, we need to bring awareness to this, and there's also things that we can do to prevent it as well.
Right. And I think it's important to, as peers, we learn this. You really have to meet people where they are. If somebody isn't ready, within reason, if somebody isn't ready to start seeing a therapist or, go into a hospital program, that's okay. There are other means that may also, other modes to treatment or paths to treatment, rather, that someone can take. But that is within reason. If somebody is, experience or expressing like active suicidal thoughts, probably not the safest thing for them to say, well, no, that's okay. Like, I don't want to seek treatment right now because it may be fatal. But it's really important to meet people where they are. Someone's willingness to engage in treatment, if you can get them to agree, I mean, I guess we're not really persuading people.
Giving them options. So
Right.
if they are in a space where, like how the police officer did to me,
Right.
he was like, okay, you attempted taking your life or you're a threat to yourself. I can give you two options. I can handcuff you, or we could call the paramedics and we can come get you. Handcuffing is a whole nother thing, but at least he gave me an option, so that way I felt like I had a sense of control.
Right.
When I got to the hospital, they said, you can voluntarily sign yourself into the hospital, or we're going to do it.
Right.
And at that point, they said if I do it on my own, I have more control versus if I don't, or if they have to do it. So giving that person options, because as adults, we don't like to be told what to do. And even though both options from the psychiatrist at the hospital as well as the police officer, the result ended the same, but I was still empowered to make a choice for myself that I felt like I had control over. So it's important that you ask a person options. Would you like me to come with you to sit in therapy? Would you like me to make your appointment?
Right.
Would you like me to sit in the hallway? Would you like me to come stay with you? Do you need me to come to stay at your house for a few hours a day? Do you need me to pick up your kids? Like, whatever it is that they might need to feel best supported. This is if a person is not actively planning on carrying out a plan. They don't have the intent. And so really asking that person, like, how can I best support you? And helping them. And sometimes people may be like, I don't even know the kind of help that I need, because I know at one point I was there where I couldn't express what my needs were because I wasn't sure what to do.
Right.
So it's important that we kind of make sure we have these options for people who are saying, like, oh, there's this support group by the National Alliance on Mental Illness. You can go to one of these support groups. There is, you can call the crisis line, to get some more resources, the 988 crisis line. So really just making sure that you are listening, but you also help the person give options, and you give them a sense of empowerment that they're making a choice versus saying you should, or if I was you, I would, because those, again, you're making it about yourself.
Yes. And I think too that it's important just to state that in the midst of helping someone, if you find yourself in a situation where you are unsafe, or there's a situation where that person is at risk of being a danger to themselves or even you get someone else involved. If you need to call 911 to keep yourself safe, but by all means do that, because ultimately, your safety is also important too. Not just the safety of the other person, but it's okay to tag somebody else in if you're in immediate danger. I just thought that was important to say, I
Yes.
guess.
Hold on. Yes, that is, yes, important to say. And then also let the person know if they're not ready for treatment. Say, when you are available for treatment, I'll be here. I'll help you make the appointment if you would like. I'll call your insurance to find out what your copay is if you would like. I'll drive you to your appointment, or I'll come with you. Like, just letting them know when they are ready, because that's the thing, as peers, that we have learned that a person have to be ready in
Right.
order to move forward with their life. And if people are not ready, they're not going to be in a place to be receptive to do anything, because they feel like they're being forced, or they're just not going to be engaged. They're not going to be an active participant in their recovery. So it's
Right.
important to just let the person know. Encourage self-help strategies, whether if they figuring out, like, oh, going to the gym helps, or going for a walk, or going to the movies, or whatever self-help strategies that work for them. Encourage them to use any self-help strategies until they are ready to seek professional help and to get treatment.
Yep.
Yeah. So we only have our two segments left, which is our resource. So you want to share the resource? We kind of already talked about it, but
Yes. So we feel like for this episode, it would be wonderful to bring up again 988. And this launched last year nationwide. And this is the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can dial 988 just like you could dial 911, but 988 is specifically for people that are experiencing a mental health crisis, someone that needs, support with their mental health, and you can get connected with someone who is trained to handle that situation.
mm-hmm.
Someone who can advise you on the types of like resources that are out there to assist you, etc. Um, get you some help to your location if you need it. And it's just absolutely a great resource in the community.
Absolutely. And for our spotlight this week, we are spotlighting. It's like, ooh, I'm getting a little emotional. We are spotlighting my cousin Najaron Holmes. He was, I believe, he was 13 when he died by suicide. And shout out to my cousin Sarah, his mom, who has been doing so much to honor his life. And we'll have a episode where we'll speak to dedicating an entire episode around Black children and suicide, because the rates of Black children die by suicide is going up. I believe it's the second leading cause, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been going like skyrocketing. And so I want to take this time to just simply honor my cousin, to let him know that he is loved and he is missed, and that I will continue to talk about his life, and I'll also just continue to have this conversation around mental health and suicide among Black children, because we can't keep losing our babies.
Right.
So I just wanted to do that. And then I'll let Jordan take away for our moment of inspiration as we wrap up the show.
So, for our moment of inspiration, I think we just want to remind people all that we've talked about. I know it's very heavy, but just to encourage you, because mental health disorders, they're treatable. Like, there's help out there. You don't have to experience these feelings and these thoughts by yourself. There's so many resources out there. Again, 988. There's organizations that assist people that are experiencing a mental health crisis. There's therapy. There's so many different paths to treatment that you don't have to experience this by yourself. And with us, myself and T-Kea, we're here too. You know what I mean? Like, we want to be a resource to help you, and remind you that you're not alone. You're not going through this by yourself. We've both experienced this in the past,
And still sometimes
and
do.
still sometimes do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even therapy. I'm glad you brought that up. Most people think of CBT for therapy.
Mm-hmm.
There's different types of therapy, which we can have an episode where we'll kind of dive into different types of therapy. But talk therapy is only one form of
Right.
therapy.
Mm-hmm.
They call it cognitive behavioral therapy. That's only one form of treatment. And so it's important to know that there, like you said, are kind of multiple options. But again, our goal of this podcast is just really to get us to having these conversations and talking more about suicide in the Black community. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and we hope that you got something out of it. And we'll talk to you again on the next episode. This episode was sponsored by the Mental Health Empowerment Agency, where its mission is to dismantle the mental health stigma and raise awareness of suicide prevention through curated events, individual and group peer support, digital and social media, and educational trainings.